They whispered that her darkness made her invisible. They laughed that her blindness made her powerless. When she stepped on stage, even the world's most celebrated pianist smirked, certain that the girl before him was just a cruel joke. But when her fingers touched the keys, every laugh died, every whisper froze, and by the time her final note echoed in the hall, the very man who mocked her was left speechless, and the world would never forget her name. Amara Johnson had never seen the sunrise. She had never gazed upon the smooth ivory keys of the piano that she mastered with astonishing grace. Blind since birth, Amara's world was one painted in sound, rich symphonies of texture, tone, and vibration that she understood with a clarity few could ever comprehend. Born in a small town in Georgia, her life was one long thread of quiet resilience. Raised by her mother Lorraine, a school teacher and choir director, Amara had been surrounded by music since infancy. While other children played outside, she sat close to the old upright piano in her living room, her small fingers tracing the keys as though memorizing the geography of an undiscovered world. Lorraine had always told her, "Baby, you see with your soul, not with your eyes." That phrase had guided Amara through countless hurdles, not just of her blindness, but of the racial barriers that shadowed her path. Their town was no stranger to the deep-rooted prejudices of the South, and a blind black girl aspiring to be a classical pianist was considered by many an impossible dream. Still, Lorraine nurtured her daughter's talent with quiet determination, giving her private lessons, enrolling her in every recital she could find, and instilling in her a belief that her gift was meant to be heard, even if people refused to see her. By the time Amara turned 16, her talent had matured into something remarkable. Her touch was delicate yet commanding, her interpretations of Chopin and Rachmaninoff filled with an emotional depth that left even seasoned musicians awestruck. But her performances were mostly confined to small community events, local churches, and school functions. She had never stepped onto a stage that could project her voice to the world. That was until a flyer arrived in the mail, a national piano competition in New York City sponsored by none other than the world-renowned pianist and composer, Leonard Blake. Blake was a legend. His concerts sold out global arenas. His compositions were studied in conservatories from Vienna to Tokyo. His reputation was one of technical perfection and icy discipline. The competition promised a grand prize of a scholarship to the prestigious Bellamy Conservatory of Music and a mentorship under Blake himself. For Amara, it felt like a window opening in a long-locked room. Despite the whispers around her, "That's not a place for people like us," Amara's decision was clear. With her mother's savings and the support of her church community, she boarded a train to New York. Her heart beat faster with each mile, a complex mixture of anticipation and anxiety. She wasn't naive. She knew the hurdles ahead weren't just about her skill. They were about her blindness, about her blackness, about breaking into a world that rarely opened its doors to girls like her. But she carried with her the echo of her mother's voice. "Baby, you see with your soul." And that's where real music comes from. The towering glass doors of the Bellamy Conservatory shimmered in the morning light as Amara stepped inside, cane in hand and heart pounding with cautious hope. The air was rich with the hum of anticipation. Dozens of young pianists from across the country had gathered, their voices mingling with the warm-up notes drifting from practice rooms. Their clothes were sharp, their posture confident, and their eyes occasionally darted curiously toward the girl who navigated the grand hall without sight. Amara felt a subtle shift in the room as she entered. Not outright hostility, but something heavier and quieter. Doubt, pity, and in some poorly hidden amusement. She'd known these reactions before, but here in this elite conservatory under the gaze of judges and maestros, the weight of judgment pressed more sharply. Still, her face remained calm as they whispered that her darkness made her invisible. They laughed that her blindness made her powerless. When she stepped on stage, even the world's most celebrated pianist smirked, certain that the girl before him was just a cruel joke. But when her fingers touched the keys, every laugh died, every whisper froze, and by the time her final note echoed in the hall, the very man who mocked her was left speechless, and the world would never forget her name. Amara Johnson had never seen the sunrise. She had never gazed upon the smooth ivory keys of the piano that she mastered with astonishing grace. Blind since birth, Amara's world was one painted in sound, rich symphonies of texture, tone, and excellence. His words carved through the air like sharpened notes. When the orientation ended, contestants naturally gravitated toward Blake, eager to make a favorable impression. Amara, guided by the echo of footsteps and murmurs, waited patiently. Finally she approached, her cane tapping softly on the polished marble floor. "Mr. Blake," she greeted with quiet confidence, extending her hand politely. He turned to her, his sharp gaze flickering down to the cane and up to her clouded eyes. For a fleeting moment, his well-composed mask cracked. The corner of his mouth lifted, not in a smile, but in something closer to bemusement. "And you are?" he asked, his tone carefully measured. "Amara Johnson, sir. I'll be competing." There was a pause. Around them, a few of the other contestants exchanged glances. Blake let out a soft, almost imperceptible chuckle. His eyes softened into something that looked dangerously like condescension. Competing." His voice wrapped around the word as though tasting its absurdity. "I admire your courage, Miss Johnson. I hope you enjoy the experience." The subtle dismissal hung heavily in the air. He shook her hand, but there was no warmth in the gesture. As he turned away to speak with other contestants, Amara felt the sting of the moment settle deep within her chest. It wasn't just skepticism. It was the certainty that her presence here was a novelty, a formality, not a threat. But instead of retreating, she inhaled slowly, steadying herself. The competition had just begun, and so had her resolve. The day of the preliminary performances arrived with an air thick with tension. Contestants lined the grand hallway, each waiting to be called into the recital room where a gleaming Steinway grand piano awaited. Amara sat quietly at the end of the row, her cane resting against her knee, her fingers gently tapping silent melodies on her lap. Her face betrayed no fear, only focus. When her name was finally called, "Amara Johnson," to the stage, a few heads turned. Whispers rippled softly across the waiting room, and even the judges exchanged subtle glances. Leonard Blake sat among them, his expression unreadable, arms folded tightly as he leaned back in his chair. Amara rose, her movements precise. She had memorized the steps and the placement of the piano the day prior, and with the help of a stagehand, she made her way confidently to the bench. The murmurs faded into a heavy silence as she sat down, her fingertips lightly grazing the edges of the keys. The room seemed to hold its breath. Her selection was ambitious. Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, a piece renowned for its technical demands and emotional depth. Even sighted pianists hesitated before attempting it in competition. For a blind, self-taught black girl from Georgia, it seemed near impossible. Then, without hesitation, her fingers descended. The first notes echoed through the concert hall with a force that was almost physical. Her touch, simultaneously bold and tender, drew out a power hidden deep within the keys. Each phrase rose and fell with breathtaking precision, her tempo unwavering, her dynamics sculpted with soul-stirring control. What began as mere music soon transformed into something more elemental, an emotional narrative spoken in a language that transcended sight, race, and expectation. The audience sat frozen, eyes wide, mouths slightly parted. Even the other contestants, once skeptical, leaned forward unconsciously, drawn into the gravity of her performance. And at the judges' table, Leonard Blake's posture shifted. His fingers, once steepled in detachment, slowly lowered to rest on the table. His brow furrowed, not in disdain, but in reluctant awe. By the final chord, the hall was drenched in the stunned silence. For a few long seconds, no one moved. Then, as though snapped from a collective trance, the audience erupted into applause. It began scattered, then gathered force like a wave, rolling through the room in thunderous appreciation. Amara sat still, her chest rising and falling steadily, a soft smile ghosting across her lips. She bowed her head slightly in acknowledgement, then slowly stood and made her way off stage with the same quiet grace she had entered. Behind her, the murmurs had shifted. No longer dismissive, no longer skeptical. They were laced with awe, disbelief, and something much rarer, deep, unqualified respect. And at the judge's table, Leonard Blake's gaze followed her retreating form, his jaw clenched, his certainty shaken in a way he had not anticipated. Amara had not just played music. She had silenced the world. When Amara stepped back into the lobby after her performance, the atmosphere had palpably shifted. Where there had once been sidelong glances and stifled chuckles, now there was only stunned admiration. The other contestants, once distant, found themselves gravitating toward her, drawn by something they couldn't fully articulate. No one could deny what they had just witnessed. It was not simply a good performance. It was historic. A few timidly approached her. "Amara, that was extraordinary," one young woman whispered, her voice carrying both awe and apology. Another, a boy who had earlier smirked at the sight of her cane, now simply nodded solemnly as she passed. His cockiness dissolved into humility. But Amara, calm and centered, accepted the praise without pride or bitterness. For her, the music had never been about proving something to anyone. It had always been about expression, about bridging the chasm between herself and a world that often refused to see her fully. However, the most unexpected encounter came shortly after, when Leonard Blake approached her. She heard his deliberate footsteps before she sensed his presence. He cleared his throat softly and spoke, his usually commanding voice stripped of its familiar sharpness. "Miss Johnson," he began, pausing as if carefully selecting his words. "I owe you an apology." Amara tilted her head slightly, her unseeing eyes directed toward his voice. "I underestimated you," Blake continued. "I made assumptions about your ability, about your worth, before you even played a note." His words were stiff but honest. "What you did on that stage, I have not heard such mastery in decades. You reminded me of why I fell in love with music in the first place." There was silence between them. Around them, contestants and conservatory staff subtly watched the exchange unfold, their curiosity piqued by the rare sight of the stoic maestro offering something so close to humility. Amara offered a small, gracious smile. "I don't need an apology, Mr. Blake," she said gently, "but I appreciate the acknowledgement." He nodded once sharply, perhaps more to himself than to her. "You've not only earned my respect, you've taught me a lesson I should have learned long ago." Later that evening, as results were announced, it was no surprise to anyone that Amara's name was called first. She advanced to the finals unanimously, her score eclipsing every other competitor's. Yet for her, the real victory had already been won. Word of her performance began to ripple beyond the walls of the conservatory. Videos secretly recorded by attendees made their way online, going viral within hours. Headlines emerged across platforms. "Blind pianist shatters expectations. Amara Johnson, the rising star who defied the odds." Conversations ignited nationwide about talent, bias, and the unseen barriers that countless gifted individuals faced every day. And quietly, without fanfare, Amara returned to her small apartment that night, fingers still tingling from the keys, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She had changed something bigger than just a competition. She had cracked open a door that had long been shut, and she intended to keep it open for others to walk through. In the weeks that followed Amara's groundbreaking performance, her life transformed in ways she had never imagined. Invitations began pouring in from prestigious concert halls, universities, and even international festivals. What had once been a quiet, personal journey of expression was now a beacon, illuminating possibilities for countless others who, like her, had long been overlooked. But amidst the media frenzy and flashing cameras, Amara's focus remained steady. She understood something deeper than most could grasp. Her success was not just her own. It belonged to every child told they were too different to succeed, to every artist dismissed before they had a chance to speak through their craft, and to every person who had ever been underestimated because of the color of their skin or the limitations others assumed defined them. Rather than chasing fame, Amara made a deliberate choice. She accepted a handful of selective performances, but more importantly, she launched a community program called Keys Beyond Sight. It was a mentorship initiative designed to provide free piano lessons and resources to underprivileged and disabled youth, particularly those from marginalized communities. Her goal was simple: to ensure that no other young musician would have to stumble alone through the same shadows she had. The program gained momentum quickly. Students flocked to her humble studio, some blind, some struggling with other disabilities, and many simply starved of opportunity. They came with hesitant fingers and cautious hopes, and under Amara's patient guidance, they bloomed. More than just teaching scales and compositions, she nurtured confidence. She helped them hear their worth in every note, just as she had once learned to do. Leonard Blake, transformed by his encounter with Amara, became an unexpected ally. He offered resources, connected her with influential figures in the classical world, and even volunteered to hold master classes for her students. In an ironic twist, the man who had once dismissed her became one of the program's most ardent supporters, using his stature to break down walls he had once unknowingly helped build. One evening, as Amara sat with a young student, a boy named Malik, who struggled with low vision and had been told repeatedly that music was beyond his reach, she listened to him play a halting, tender version of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. His small hands trembled, but the beauty was unmistakable. As the final note faded, he turned toward her with a tentative smile and asked, "Do you think I could be like you someday?" Amara's heart swelled. She gently reached out and touched his hand. "You already are," she whispered. It became clear that her greatest legacy would not be the awards or the standing ovations, but the ripple effect of countless voices she had empowered to rise after her. The world had tried to silence her once. Now, through her music and her mentorship, she was ensuring that no such silence would ever settle again. Years passed, but the resonance of Amara Johnson's music only deepened. The seeds she had planted through Keys Beyond Sight had blossomed into a forest of talent, resilience, and hope. Her students not only learned piano, they flourished in ways no one had predicted. Many went on to win competitions, secure scholarships, and compose music that rippled through concert halls across the nation. But perhaps the most profound achievement was less visible. They carried within them a defiant sense of self-worth that no prejudice could ever erode. Amara herself had evolved into more than just a celebrated pianist. She became a symbol, a living testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of breaking silent barriers. Universities began to study her approach. Conservatories revised outdated policies regarding disabled musicians, and organizations across the world adopted mentorship models inspired by her initiative. Despite all the acclaim, Amara remained grounded. Whenever asked about her success, she would simply smile and say, "I just played what I felt and listened to those who needed to be heard." It was a simple philosophy, but its ripples had changed an entire landscape. On the 10-year anniversary of her viral performance, a grand gala was held in her honor at the very conservatory where it had all begun. Leonard Blake, now retired but still revered, introduced her to the stage with a heartfelt speech that left few dry eyes in the hall. But Amara, always humble, dedicated her address not to herself, but to the unseen. To every young person sitting in the back of the room, to those who were told to wait their turn or that their turn might never come. Let today remind you, your moment is yours to claim. Whether the world notices immediately or not, you are worthy of being heard. As she sat at the piano that evening, her fingers brushing familiar keys, she thought not of awards nor of fame, but of that little girl who once sat alone, mocked and ignored, believing her dreams too distant to reach. She smiled softly. Her journey had come full circle, and yet it was only just beginning for all those who would walk through the door she had opened. Now let me ask you, have you ever been underestimated, and how did you prove the world wrong? Do you believe that breaking barriers for ourselves also clears paths for those who come after us? Share your story with us in the comments, because your voice matters more than you know. And if stories like these inspire you, don't forget to subscribe to the Arc of Stories, where real lives spark real change.